Hi, my name's Gavin Boden, and tonight I'm going to read you a couple of chapters from my book, The Dreams of Time. It's about two teenagers that discover they can travel through time and change their lives. Chapter 1. The Headmaster's Visit. Ryan Hero was one of the worst kids in his school. His file in the battered green metal cabinet in the stuffy headmaster's office was one of the thickest. It was filled with late days, truancy, smoking behind the bike sheds, you name it, he'd done it. But the largest section was regarding his constant fighting and bullying. Every day he would target the same dorky kids, stealing their lunch money and beating them up. With Paul Roberts and Jed Thompson, who were his bullying sidekicks, Ryan had made every nerd's life a nightmare. Paul was a big clumsome teenager who always wore the same smelly blue Chelsea football shirt every day and never washed his hands after going to the bathroom, which drove Ryan crazy. Until recently, Ryan had never liked Paul. He was always too loud and always getting the people he hung around with into trouble. One time, Paul and a few of his deadbeat friends had broken into the local disused paper mill. It had been empty for years, and it had been boarded up for as long as they could remember. The building had been built in the early 1900s, was very tall, very dark, and very overwhelming. Paul had managed to smash open one of the old pieces of wood, which had been covering a broken window. Once inside the damp, cavernous building, they'd all set about smashing everything they could find, rusty old chairs, machinery, and any windows which were still intact. Of course, the neighbours around the building had heard all the commotion and alerted the police, and once they'd arrived, there was no way for the boys to escape. They were all taken down into the local police station, and their parents were called. Now this did a trick for a lot of the boys, because they turned over a new leaf, but not Paul. He revelled in the attention he received, and set about doing anything he could to get into more trouble. Since then, he had been in trouble with the police several times, and nobody understood why he hadn't been expelled from school. Jed Thompson, he liked to spend his weekends at car boot sales, selling his mum's record collection, which she thought had been stolen in a burglary earlier in the year. Jed knew that the vintage record collection was worth a lot of money, and that one day when he was on his own at home, broke a window, smashed the house up, and took the record collection and some money to make it look like a burglary. Up to now, he'd saved over £250, which he'd kept in a smelly old trainer in the back of his dark oak wardrobe. Until Jed had met Paul, he wouldn't have thought of stealing from his mum. In the past, he'd been an A-grade student. He'd always stayed between the lines, spending most of his time impressing everyone with his sports skills. This Tuesday was no different to any other. Not surprisingly, it had been raining all morning. The three boys started their day by waiting outside the school gates for Timothy Smith. They stole his lunch money, and Ryan gave him a swift punch, unknowingly giving him a broken nose. They then hid behind the A block, skipping their math lesson, where they laughed about what they could spend Timothy's money on. They pushed to the front of the line at lunchtime, and while they chose their food, they gave the poor dinner ladies a tough time by calling them names and throwing the bullet-like sprouts at each other. After lunch, they got their mark, skipped school, and walked down to the arcades near the beach. They spent many afternoons down there avoiding lessons and, of course, the truancy officer. This afternoon, they was violently banging the game machines and checking the coin slots for cash. It was a surprise to them that they'd never been kicked out of any of the arcades down there. When it got to 3:30, they said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. Both Jed and Paul lived off Simpson Street, and Ryan lived the other side of her town with his mum. Underneath all the false confidence and bravado, Ryan really was a good kid. He helped with the dishes, made his bed, and he always spoke to his mum with respect. But he'd never forgiven his dad for leaving them. This happened about 2 years ago, when he was 12. His mum and dad had been arguing about something in their bedroom. Their loud screaming could be heard through the thick brick walls of the house, angry and booming. This wasn't the first time They'd argued a lot since Grandad had died in that terrible car accident. Their shouting was always loud and was always in the evenings. There was a lot of banging and a lot of screaming. His dad had stormed out of the bedroom with his well-travelled suitcase, brown duffel bag and his laptop. On the way out the door he paused, turned and looked at Ryan with his sad red eyes. And that was it. He was gone. Out of the door and out of Ryan's life forever. However bad it had been, he'd never expected his dad to leave. But not once did he blame his mum for his dad leaving. Shortly after his dad had left, his mum sat him down and explained that life could be hard, and when a tragedy happens in a family, something of this kind can happen. Ryan had always wondered where his dad had gone, but he could never talk to his mum about it without causing emotions to run high. There were times over the last 2 years when Ryan had imagined his dad living in a far-off country in an apartment block overlooking a wide, dirty river. His dad had always travelled for his job, and whenever he went away, he always brought Ryan something back from his trip. Once, when he was over in America, he'd brought him back an amazing sand dollar. His dad had explained to him that a sand dollar is a species of extremely flattened burrowing sea urchin which looked like a disc with 5 holes in and an imprint of a starfish on it. Although we didn't like his dad working away, he was very excited about him coming home to see what treasures he would bring. Ryan arrived home as though he had been at school all day, expecting to find his mum in the kitchen preparing his tea. But as he walked through the front door, the mood was very solemn, and his mum shouted in a weird voice from the front room, "Ryan, come through into the room." He walked through into the front room, only to find his headmaster with his mum. The headmaster was there, in his house. Mr. Jameson was one of the good guys. He really cared about the kids, how they got at school, and wanted to make sure they fulfilled all their potential. He was easily the tallest person Ryan had ever seen, standing at around about 7 foot. He had stooped before he went through the doors, and Ryan had always thought that he was an actual giant. After graduating from university, Mr. Jameson had spent time travelling around different schools in the country, covering for teachers who were ill or on holiday. After he spent about 10 years travelling around, he settled at Cleamsby Academy after falling in love and getting married to the girl of his dreams. Since then, he's worked his way up to assistant head, and then a couple of years later became one of the best headmasters the school had ever seen. During his time as head, the school had gained a fantastic reputation in the area, and the average grades there had gone up significantly. As he sat in one of the armchairs, his massively long legs stretched out across the room. The room was lit by an old standard lamp which stood behind the sofa, its dusty paisley patterned shade preventing the pearlescent 60-watt bulb illuminating the room as it should. The brown box-like wooden 24-inch TV in the opposite corner was turned off, and the 2 adults were sat cupping mugs of tea with both hands, looking very serious. "Hello, Ryan," he said, as he put his cup down on one of the tables. "Sit down with me and your mum. I've got some bad news, and I fear you've got yourself into a lot of trouble." Ryan looked worriedly over at his mum. As he sat down on the chair between the 2 adults, he noticed how soft and warm the chair was, as though Mr. Jameson had been sat there a few moments ago. He went on to tell Ryan that Timothy Smith was in the General Hospital in a coma, and that it was very serious. The punch on the nose that Ryan had given him had sent him to the floor, knocking him out unconscious. The headmaster was right. It was serious. Ryan zoned out while Mr. Jameson carried on speaking, thinking of the injured boy laid on his own in the white, sterile hospital bed, coloured wires coming from everywhere, and the machine in the corner beeping away. As the headmaster left, he turned and stood there looking at him like Ryan's dad had done when he left, and uttered, "A detective from the police will be coming to see you in the morning. Make sure you're ready. You're in a lot of trouble, young man." That night, although his mum was worried about him, she had to show him some discipline, so she sent him to bed early with a small glass of lukewarm water, a plate of stale bread and cheap strawberry jam. As he sat in his dark room, he thought back on the day and wondered why he had ever hit Timothy Smith. As he sat quietly, a tear rolled down his cheek. Ryan was filled with dread as he thought about the coming morning and how his mum would hate him for what he'd done. The room seemed to shrink in around him. The walls enveloped him. He tried to think of a way he could put it right, make everything go away, so he could change his ways and make his mum proud of him again. But it was useless. He sat there for more than an hour, and apart from reliving his day, he couldn't think of another way to make it all better. The illuminated digital clock on his side table said 11:20. He'd been sat thinking for a long, long time. His eyes were stinging from the tears, and he was tired after his long day. He put his partly eaten bread and jam on the side table, laid his head on the pillow, and his eyelids grew heavier and heavier, and he started to fall asleep. Chapter 2. It's called The First Dream. Ryan awoke with a start, slightly confused, as he was stood outside of his house on the other side of the street. The sky was dark with rain clouds, but the air was fresh like the morning. Ryan thought to himself, "Can't be the morning already. And more importantly, what am I doing out here?" He looked down at his clothes, and he was wearing his favourite blue jeans, the ones with the holes in the knees, his white t-shirt, and his black old trainers, which were a gift from his Auntie Jane. He still couldn't understand how he'd got out there. As he walked towards the house, intending to go back in, the front door opened, and a boy walked out of his house. Wait a minute, who was that coming out of his house? It looked like him. He was wearing his school uniform and carrying his high-tech bag. Ryan stood there in the middle of the road, not quite believing what he was seeing. As the boy walked down the garden, Ryan could see that it was him. Me? What? He thought, confused. At that point, a car sounded its loud, booming horn, which made Ryan jump out of his skin. He turned and looked at the angry man in the big blue car and stepped apologetically onto the path. The boy who looked like him had started walking lazily down the street towards school, so Ryan decided to follow. The boy took the same route as he would have to meet Jed and Paul, down Eleanor Street, through the park and across Smithson Road. Ryan followed him at a safe distance. He didn't want to be seen by the boy, but was really intrigued by the events of the chilly morning. He watched as the boy stood on the corner of Smithson Road and Wellington Street waiting. He couldn't be waiting for his friends, could he? Thought Ryan. The next thing, both Jed and Paul rounded the corner and greeted the boy. As they did, Jed dropped his bag and the contents rolled across the pavement, just as it had done the day before. Ryan thought he must be dreaming. He pinched himself to see if he would wake up. All it did was sting. Then he remembered that the day before, just after he'd met up with the guys, the milkman drove past them and a bottle of milk had fallen from the cart and smashed on the floor in front of them. Just at that moment, exactly the same thing happened. The rusty white electric milk cart came around the tight corner a bit too fast, hopped a little bit, making black marks on the road, and causing all the bottles in the cart to jump around. One of the bottles escaped its crate and smashed violently on the road, spilling its white milky contents all over the black tarmac. It can't be, thought Ryan. Am I dreaming about yesterday? About what happened? He ran across the busy road to carry on his observations of the boys. It was weird, because here he was, watching himself and his friends go about the happenings of the day before. As he jumped onto the pavement on the other side of the road, he accidentally kicked the curb, tripped, fell, and bumped into an old lady walking with her dog. The dog was cute and had black and white patches all over his back. The lady tried to steady herself, and in doing so dropped the dog's long leather lead. The small dog was startled by all the commotion and shot off like a bullet down the street. Within a couple of seconds, he ran round the corner and was gone. The round-faced old lady was furious, shouting and screaming at Ryan while she hurriedly shuffled in the direction the dog had run. Ryan tried to apologise, with no avail, so continued following the boys towards the school. When he arrived at the school, he saw the boys, as expected, waiting outside for any unsuspecting nerds to come along. As he waited, he saw Timothy Smith approaching the big black iron school gates. Without thinking, he found himself calling out to him, "Timothy!" Timothy quickened his step a little, but Ryan had managed to catch up, standing in front of him. Timothy looked petrified and immediately cowered, reaching for the money from his pocket. "I don't want your money today, Tim, but I want you to go in the east exit. Don't go in this way because my friends are waiting for you, and you know what they're going to do," said Ryan. Timothy looked bemused. Normally, he would be on the floor by this time, receiving taunts and jabs by the bullies. He muttered a timid, "Okay," and quickly turned around and walked towards the entrance on the other side of the school. He disappeared around the corner and was gone. Ryan went and stood in the place where he was before to spy on the boys. After a few minutes, the bell rang, and they all bungled in through the school doors. Once again, he suddenly awoke, but this time he was in his cosy, warm bed. He looked at the clock on the side table, and it read 7:35 a.m. He got out of his bed and thought about his crazy dream as he got dressed. He popped his head out of the bedroom and could hear his mum singing softly downstairs in the kitchen, making his breakfast. He wasn't looking forward to the police coming round to ask him tough questions. Should he tell them the truth, or should he lie and try and get out of it? Once again, he imagined Timothy lying in hospital bed. Ryan's aching stomach turned upside down, thinking about what lay ahead. He descended the stairs, sheepishly went into the kitchen, and plopped himself at the table. "What's wrong with you this morning, Grumpy?" his mum asked. Surely she hadn't forgot about the imminent arrival of the detective, knowing Timothy was helplessly laid in the hospital because of her son's cruel actions. "Mum, the police, they're going to be here soon," muttered Ryan. "The police? What are the police coming for?" she asked with a shocked look on her face. "What have you been up to now? Have those naughty boys been leading you astray again?" "Mum, they're coming round because Timothy Smith, and the reason he's in hospital. Can't you remember the headmaster visiting last night?" "Are you going mad?" she asked. "We were round at Auntie Jane's all last night. It was her 55th birthday, and we didn't get back until 11 o'clock, so how could Mr. Jameson come and see us? What are you talking about?" As she stood there looking down at Ryan, he wondered if he had gone mad, or if his dream had miraculously changed the events of the day before. Thank you for listening. You could read more of my book at www.gavinboden.co.uk. Good night.